we're kind of getting into some off-season speculation. So do you want to talk some draft and some
Yeah.
trades?
So I wanted to finish off this podcast, the last hour or so that we do. I wanted to just kind of get our final thoughts on the draft out there. So, we did I think our most recent draft pod was like a month ago. And we kind of went back and forth and we drafted the first 20. We did like a weird number of picks. We did like the first 23 or something.
We went until we couldn't keep going.
Yeah. So let's just kind of go back and forth, and have your thoughts changed about the draft in the last month at all? Are there any teams kind of in this lottery where you might consider them trading a pick, or have some specific player that they might want to move up, or anything like that?
Yeah, I'll like to answer the first part of your question in terms of like feelings that have changed, and because the amount of scouting of these players I do, it's still kind of a trickle in over the whole season. So by the time I actually get to the draft, I do
Yeah.
feel like I've got a much stronger grasp on. I've just seen more players. I've just watched more footage. So I think the biggest thing that has changed for me is that I am a lot higher on everyone in my top 11. Like I feel
Okay.
really good. I have a hard time ordering the top 11 a lot of the times because everyone, I thought they were all good in that sort of range. But now I'm like, as I think about mock drafts and I think about like which team's going to pick who, I'm just like, oh, you have like the 5th pick and you're going to get to choose between like a Thompson twin or Anthony Black or Taylor Hendricks or like, oh, Jarris Walker's still on the board. Like no one's drafted Cam Whitmore yet. I'm just like the top 11 player, my top 11 players, which ends with Cason Wallace, who last time we talked, you were not high on. So maybe it's just a top 10 for you, but I am very excited about all kinds of those players going to all kinds of teams. That's the biggest thing. I've got some minor like fallers, like guys that last time we talked about. I'm no longer high on. I'll just quickly say Jet Howard, Maxwell Lewis, and Adam Bona are players that I've sort of lost a little bit of interest in.
Those weren't guys that were in your top 10 though, or anywhere near it?
No, my top 10 hasn't changed. And
Okay.
I feel like we've watched actually like the consensus come around. Like I've got a consensus mock draft, like an aggregated mock draft in front of me right now, just to know what other people are saying. And I feel like everyone's really come around to like the top 10 or 11 picks being the same 10 or 11 guys. And
Can I pull that up? What's that on?
rookiescale.com/2023-consensus-board or hyphen,
Okay.
not dash. Because I was surprised to see it, because like that's actually my exact top, not pick for pick, but like the top 13 players there are the same top 13 players that I have. And then so just if anyone doesn't know what I'm referencing here right now, who I am saying and who apparently are the consensus top 11 guys are Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, Brendan Miller, Amen Thompson, Cam Whitner, Jarris Walker, Ouster Thomas, Anthony Black, Taylor Hendricks, Grady Dick, Cason Wallace, and then Derek Lively and Kobe Buffkin rounding out the top 13.
Maybe we should talk about the 3 major risers during the past couple of months. Kobe Buffkin, Koulibaly, and Derek Lively, I think. Now, I was a little bit early on Derek Lively. I had him in my lottery. I have only felt more and more strongly about that over time. I just think like the physical tools of a 7'1" guy with long arms who's that mobile, you can't really teach that. So, and also just like incredible defensive instincts late in the college season. Best rim protector in college basketball by some metrics.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like his offensive game isn't the most polished thing in the world. He's working on his 3-point shot a little bit, apparently in workouts and stuff. He's been decent at hitting that corner 3, but like just the physical tool set there, like it's a pretty incredible prospect depending on how he develops. So I feel even better.
I really just want him to get to Dallas. I really just want.
Dallas would love that.
I just want for him to go to a place where he's going to be able to be a lob catching, rim running threat on offense. I think if he goes somewhere a little bit more random, I think the lack of offensive game could derail his career a little bit. Like I think there's legitimate concerns with like how little he was able to do on offense because that's not how he was sold.
Yeah.
As we like, coming into this league, people are talking about his skill set and his multifaceted potential, and instead he ended up looking so limited, which is why I was lower on him early. But as I got into his strengths a little bit more, I was like, oh man, this I mean, he's huge. He's so huge and so long, and he does all the things that you want a center to do. In a really funny way, he reminds me of a Bizarro. As a prospect, he reminds me, this is a player whose game has nothing to do with his, but I'll justify why I'm saying this in a sec. He reminds me a bit of Lonzo Ball. I had a really hard time projecting Lonzo Ball in his draft, and same with his brother. Eventually, it's like there are like 3 skills here that this player does at a genius level, and seems like completely non NBA level at other things.
Yeah.
Like just there's some parts of the game just like I don't know how to project this because I know this stuff is genius, but like what do I do with like this body, and what do I do with like the fact that there's just these things that you can't do. And Derek Lively's like that, where he just has like all these like 10s and 0s in his game, and you're just like, so what, like how do I assess that? But again, that's why I think like he goes to a place where he can make an impact right away with the strengths that he does have. And I think we're gravy with Derek Lively. But if he ends up being like a backup big playing with like a scoring guard, I think that it's gonna be a rockier start for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty safe that he will get to Dallas. I guess the Utah Jazz are the one team that kind of really stands in the way. Um, I don't super see Washington taking him, considering there's probably still going to be one of the Thompson twins available at that spot. One of these top 8 guys that most people seem to have just a like slight tuft of hair above everyone else. Pacers taking him doesn't really make a lot of sense. So, I mean, it's kind of up to what the Jazz do, but I kind of feel like if they don't take him, he'll be there for Dallas at 10. And, I also, like you, love that marriage.
But what if we don't know how Dallas feels? So Dallas wouldn't, there's some teams, depending on what they value,
Yeah,
you could see them going for a completely different kind of player.
If Taylor Hendricks is still there at 10, just in terms of like the fit with Luka, maybe they'd be tempted to go that route. But
yeah, totally. Let's talk about we talked about Derek Lively, which is who we were pretty far apart on him last time. It sounds like now we're in the exact same place with him. Let's talk about Cason Wallace, since he's another guy we were far apart in the other way, where I was high and you were low.
Yes, I'm still low. So where are you at?
Well, I mean, last time you called him a small guard, and he's measured out at like 6'4" with a 6'8" wingspan. So I think like that part of his
big one, kind of a average size 2.
Yeah. Well, you know who he reminds me of? I think one of the reasons I actually feel higher about him is just watching Bruce Brown go through these playoffs. And Cason Wallace comes in with a more polished skill set than Bruce Brown did coming out of Miami, and has that same kind of insane competitive tenacity, is arguably a better defensive prospect, and his offensive polish is a little bit higher. Like, and if I just see a reasonable expectation for him having like a reasonable floor of being a Bruce Brown type. And Bruce Brown was awesome, was kicking people's ass in the final sort of thing. If he was in a different, situation, he might be like, like he's a starting caliber guard in the NBA. So I think that's Cason Wallace's floor, or if I'm like, obviously we don't know what anyone's floor is. Careers can go all kinds of ways, but if that's like a reasonable expectation for him on the low end, that's a player to be pretty excited about. I think on the back end of the lottery, I'm not putting him above any of the, like I have him at 11, which means I don't have like any of the other more exciting prospects below him or anything like that. But I think he's the start of like the kind of third tier of prospects.
Yeah, I think I would have him in kind of like the low teens at this point.
Who do you have above him besides Derek Lively?
Right. That is the question. Let me open that up. I still have Keontae George above him.
Interesting.
I still I still really like Bryce Sensabaugh. Um, in some
Mm-hmm.
respects, he seems to have fallen really hard on a lot of these mock draft types of things. I still like Ray and Rupert. I'm not really sure why a lot of people are kind of cooling on him. You
I don't
know,
get that either. I'm still high on him, but I've been fighting it. Where do I have Ryan Rupert at right now? I've got him at down to 17, but I see him like in a lot. Like I see him falling out of the first round on plenty of mocks. Where is he at in this consensus? He is. I'm not even finding him. Um, he's at 25, so still in the
and
first round.
you're gonna love this, but I still have Chris Murray.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think some of the things I just said about Case and Wallace on a slightly lower degree, I think you could be excited about Chris Murray in terms of his floor being high. But I mean, I don't have any new thoughts on Chris Murray. I'm thinking like worse Keegan Murray. That's
Yeah,
maybe still a good NBA player.
yeah. I just with Kason Wallace. So like Bruce Brown at Miami when he was there was like, I don't know. He was like the ultimate Swiss Army knife. You know, he was. I've never seen a guy who is not like definitely not at Miami, like not an off ball spot up shooter at all, like have so much of an impact off ball. And I think that's why a lot of people were excited about him. Like he just causes chaos. You know, it's not just the offensive rebounding, like it's the really smart cutting. It's like the ducking into spots that the defense isn't covering.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's like he can set screens, like he can roll to the rim whenever you want. I don't know, just he just has like a super high off ball movement IQ. That's really
Mhm.
rare, and I don't know if I have ever seen that with Kason Wallace. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, he was put into like, especially as the season went on, he was like, he was the guy that Duke was trusting more and more with the on ball reps. Like they were just like at the beginning of the season, it was kind of a crowded backcourt, and by the end of it, it was sort of like he was the guy they wanted running pick and roll because he was efficient with his passing decision making, and he was one of the only guys who could actually score at the rim for them really
yeah,
consistently. But like when I watch him defensively, like he's just making plays all over the court. Like he just sort of, I
hmm
feel like you could use him like maybe not some of the same like Bruce Brown magic, but I just feel like just put him in a backcourt with any other player and he's going to find a way to bring value with his defense, with his off ball shooting. And if you need him to run some weak side pick and roll, he's like, more than capable sort of thing. So I don't know if I see a ton of like crazy high end upside because there's just guys in this draft who are way better athletes. He's a solid athlete. He's got solid size. He's kind of solid at everything, but I just think that amounts to where I have him. And Keontae
and
George, I have to stop myself from plunging him down like out of the first round every
hmm
week. I have him in the lottery. I have him as my last lottery pick at 14.
okay, that's
But like,
generous.
well, yeah, but some days I'm just like, maybe he's trash. Maybe he's just like I mean, like there's lots of red flags there. Even like
Yeah,
there's some tantalizing offensive potential, and then like when you look at the season that he actually had, concerns. I like him as a like potentially as a Raptor if they keep some of the roster as presently constructed, just because like a place where he could be a more have a higher volume playmaking role right away and work with a
hmm
lot of like defenders and finisher types would be the best way for him to shine. But if he gets into a crowded backcourt, I can just see him like, okay, another like scoring guard that struggles. There's some things I like about his defense. I think like I don't think he's flashed some defensive ability. I worry about the rim finishing. I think that's pretty concerning that he's not really he does not project as being like any having any rim pressure in the NBA, and that's kind of important when you're an offensive guard. But I never really liked prospects like that. But I think some of the high end stuff does make me like keep him in the lottery or see him as a mid first round pick where Nick Smith, on the other hand, I have him out of the first round.
Okay, yeah, I still have Nick Smith in the first round, kind of around the 20s or so. I just think I don't know, just kind of like the athletic shiftiness is really intriguing to me. Just the fact that he can kind of get by anyone at any time.
Yeah.
Like what he actually does with the ball once he does that isn't something that I necessarily love. But like he also he had really limited reps at Arkansas because of all the injuries. We haven't seen a ton from Nick Smith.
Well, I think there's two prospects with incredible variability on tons of mock drafts that have this kind of thing that AJ Griffin had last year, which is just wondering like, okay, we know these guys were hurt. We
Yeah.
know that like they looked less athletic than they looked in high school. So is there a surprise bounce back thing? And I'm talking about Nick Smith. Can you guess the other one?
Derek Whitehead.
Yes. So, and I don't have Derek Whitehead. I have Derek Whitehead in my second round, like the 39th pick, but I've seen him in like people whose opinions on prospects I respect who still have him in the top 10. And I'm always like, what are you talking about? But this idea, like, especially because he's hurt again. But the idea that he can do everything that he's currently been able to do in college at a more athletic level with the kind of strength that he has and the shooting ability that he has, like, I understand why someone would be optimistic about him. I'm not, so I can't get all the way there, but I think he's still like a prospect that unless he gets injured, if he gets officially injury red flagged in the draft process, like I think that's over. These, you know, like then we're looking at at best a DeJuan Blair level career or something. But
a couple solid years, and then he kind of retires, or you know, kind of is out of the NBA by his late 20s.
Yeah, but speaking of Derek Whitehead, you mentioned another prospect that you're high on that I'm pretty low on, and that's Bryce Sensabaugh. He's fallen down kind of in the 20s in the consensus there, but you're still high on him. So sell me on Sensabaugh. Cool last name.
I mean, just in that range, like after 11, I think the draft does become a bit of a crapshoot in terms of like a lot of these guys being on a similar level. I just like, you know, the age and inexperience being so comfortable and so effective at creating offense, especially in a major conference where perimeter defense is plentiful. So that's what I like about Bryce Sensabaugh. I don't like the size and kind of the frame. Like he's only 6'6". I was kind of hoping, you know, Derek Whitehead I thought was around the same size as Sensabaugh, but he's like an inch and a half taller. So I mean, I think I've cooled on him a little bit. Originally, I did have him in the lottery and moved him down a little bit, mostly because of the frame and the height.
Where do you have him now on your big board?
Late teens.
Okay, I've got him at 26 right now.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about him in the same kind of, actually, you know, right here at 24, 25, 26, I got Chris Murray, Jet Howard, and Bryce Sensabaugh. And I think they're kind of interesting. They're grouped together here, just looking at it now, because I've got this big concern with guys that aren't coming in expecting to be stars. So like this, what I'm about to say does not apply to the sort of like, you know, top 5 or top 10 picks of the draft. But when guys can't defend and don't project as good defenders, in fact, project as maybe having some major defensive problems in the NBA, I'm pretty concerned with them even just really being able to establish themselves in the league. Because if you're
just talking about Jet here, or is this all three?
I'm talking about Jet and Bryce, and why I think Chris Murray is like because Chris Murray is a less exciting offensive player than both those two. Like Jet Howard can absolutely spit fire, and Bryce Sensabaugh can score on anybody. But I don't see either of them doing that in the NBA, where Chris Murray's going to come in and shoot spot up threes and defend and find a place for himself in the NBA. And I think that's what everyone's picturing. Where Jet and Bryce are going to try to win their way into coaches' offenses, and you're going to have to live with how bad their defense is. And that's just like, I think that's a really hard path. I think like, and it's the same, I mean, same thing we were talking about with Keontae. Well, like to some extent, like this is why neither of us like small guards, and why there's Nick Smith and Keontae George skepticism. It's just like, we know that you're probably going to be a really bad defender. So you have to be amazing on offense. And what if you're not amazing on offense? So I think, you know, Bryce and Jet have a ton to work on to just to be able to get the opportunity to play their game. So the further I go down the first round, either you're taking kind of random shots at guys who you think will have surprise value, but finding guys who are going to be players, who are going to get into your rotation, because you do want your first round draft pick to become a rotation player. It is like a bit of an ouchie when it doesn't happen. It's also it's very common as well.
Yeah.
So that's my concern with those two, even though like both those guys' offensive games are incredible. Like they're both like Jet Howard coming off screens. He's got some sneaky good passing. He's just like, he can really get kind of like rolling, going to his right and hit all sorts of shots. And he's like crafty. And Bryce Sensabaugh is like I mean, he really like looks like one of the toughest scorers in the whole draft. It's really fun to watch like their highlights, especially. But when I watch further tape on them and see the like, I mean, Bryce Sensabaugh looks, they just like, they both look in sort of different ways, like really helpless sometimes against certain kinds of actions that they're going to face all the time in the NBA. So that's why I have them below guys like Chris Murray, why I like, I'm maybe more optimistic about even a guy like Bilal Coulibaly or CD Sissoko or Ryan Rupert, like all these guys who just, I think they're going to have a better chance at like establishing themselves, where I worry about those two just being like, oh yeah, you're pretty good at offense, but not good enough to like be the second option in a lineup. So what do you really do for us, or how are you going to get on the floor?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think for the most part, we're kind of in agreement with how a lot of mock drafters and probably a lot of NBA GMs are seeing this as well. Because like as the season has gone on, we've seen more and more of the players who don't necessarily have the physical profile to project as good NBA defenders slip down the boards, and guys that maybe aren't as exciting but are probably at least have a chance to be solid on defense rising.
Yeah.
Like I think that's a huge part of why Koulibaly has risen so much.
Yeah.
And he's playing in an entirely different league that has a very different style, but he's been a pretty awesome perimeter defender over in France. So, and he's rocketed up draft boards as the season has gone on.
Now, who do you think is the worst defender in the projected projected in the lottery?
In the entire lottery?
Or more amongst those like top picks that everyone is sort of in consensus.
To be honest, probably the Thompson twins. Just because I think there's going to be such an adjustment from overtime elite to the NBA. I mean, that probably isn't going to be a permanent thing, but at least the first couple of seasons, I think people are going to be shocked with like awesome defensive, smash a ball into the fifth row highlights coming into the NBA and then looking clueless when they actually get there.
Yeah, I think it's crazy though to look down the top, really the top like 16 picks and realize that those are the two oldest players in the draft.
Yeah.
Like that sucks because they've played nowhere near the competition of everybody else has. So like ever since I've learned how old they were, like I think I said this last time we talked about it, like they scare me. And I really like both their games, and I have both of them pretty high. And most people are. I also like that they measured as having 7-foot wingspans. I thought they had shorter arms than that, so that was great. Mm-hmm. Physically, but like, yeah, I was assuming you were going to say Grady Dick when it came to defense.
No, Grady Dick. I don't think Grady Dick is a good defender right now, but I mean, he's 6'8", he moves well. He's got a nice wingspan. Like, I think Grady Dick will be fine.
Yeah, I assumed his defense was really bad, and there's reasons for that. Like in the footage, there's some things he really struggles with, but I also saw some pretty intriguing kind of like anticipation and disruption potential with him. Like he's I think his defensive potential is that's my opinion on Grady Dick has changed a lot based on where I think his defensive ceiling is a lot higher than I think he's casually projected at. I think just people see like, like skinny white guy shooter and assume the worst. And I do think right now he's not like an amazing man defender. And he doesn't have incredible awareness overall, but I've seen some highlights where he just kind of like comes out of nowhere and pokes the ball away. Kind of like, he's like, he's sneaky and crafty and his instincts are really good. And I think as he gets more reps, the awareness is going to come along to that. And we're going to see a really solid team defender. So Grady Dick is a player where I'm like, wow, I want so many teams to draft this player, but do I like him better than all these other guys that I also really like? Like he usually ends up kind of coming in below most of the players, but I'm like, I mean, we said last time, like if he could get to Orlando with their second pick, oh my gosh, I'm really, really hoping for a big Orlando draft.
That'd be perfect.
Select the players. Yeah. So do you have any fun play, looking at this consensus board, do you have any fun players that you're a little irrational higher on than that you haven't mentioned yet?
Oh, that's a good one. I feel like every draft there's at least one or two just like veteran guys, junior or senior, definitely upperclassmen that are just like really smart, heady basketball players, and they just end up making like an impact immediately in the NBA. We've definitely seen this the past couple of years. I'm kind of failing to think of some names at the moment. And Malcolm Brogdon is obviously the classic example of this, right? But
Yeah.
almost every season has at least one of those guys. Chris Murray, I think, has some potential, but like the guy that I'd actually feel best about just like coming in and making an impact right away and like being like part of an 8-man playoff rotation is probably Jaime Jaquez.
I was wondering if that was the direction you were going in. He really
Yeah,
seemed to be
no,
to
I
like
mean,
fit exactly what you were saying.
and he's snuck into the first round. I just like he's so like smart and decisive and like just kind of
Yeah.
knows exactly what to do at all times on a basketball floor, and not the most athletic prospect, obviously. Doesn't have a crazy awesome frame for defense or anything like that. He's kind of an inconsistent 3-point shooter, so like there are some warts for sure, but just a guy who like is not going to hurt you.
I mean, it's funny because like if you watch film of him, you look at some of the stuff he does best, and you have to feel, well, he's never gonna do any of these things in the NBA. Like his little like his pump fake game, his like all these things are going to be like forever banned from him the moment he steps into the NBA. But you look at how just sort of like how he approaches the game, and you look kind of at the versatility, and he is the kind of player you're like, I think he's just going to invent a whole new game in the NBA. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think he's just going to come out and there's going to this he's a hard player to project. So I'm just like, I don't know, maybe he's just going to come out and he's going to be like one of the best offensive rebounders and be a way better 3-point shooter than he was in college, or like he's going to do something. He just seems like the guy who's going to do something like that and going to achieve in ways that are hard to predict because his motor is so high, because he's so competitive, and because like he checks the bare minimum qualities to like there's not these big holes where you're like, I don't know, like he's big enough, he's 6'7"
Mm-hmm.
without shoes with a 6'9" wingspan, not exceptional but big enough where like he's got some multi-positionality. He's really strong, which I think is something that is sneakily really useful in the NBA in terms of just playing right away. Like he's going to be able to just kind of get his hands on balls and carve out space, and just it does seem like the kind of guy who will like put me in a lineup and I will help you win. So
And I
I
think the
definitely
big thing with him is the versatility. Like providing the spot up 3-point shot comes along. I mean, he's actually a pretty decent off the dribble 3-point shooter, but like
yeah.
you just can't really spot up, which is weird. Usually it's the opposite. But like provided that improves, like you can really put him 2 through 4, and he can guard those positions too. So I mean, the
Yeah.
worry, it's not like there's no risk. The worry is always like the Gravis Vasquez syndrome, right? Where he just plays the exact same way he did in college and it doesn't
But
work.
to be fair, Grievous Vasquez was pretty good for a minute. Like
Yeah, until he got
he had a
hurt.
couple, yeah. Like
Yeah.
he was the kind of player that he could not afford to lose what little step that
Yeah,
he
he
had,
couldn't
and
lose
once
a
he
quarter
lost
of
it, it
a
was
step,
over.
and he
Yeah,
did. So,
but
or
I mean, like
maybe like Tyler Hansbrough is a better comparison.
Tyler Hansbrough. That's actually, I mean, that's I think the concern with, because they've got the same favorite move, the same like
Yeah,
kind of shovel your head into someone up fake, like just like bully your way to points. And Psycho T was funny in that like he never stopped being able to draw fouls at an elite level. It's just that can't be your entire game in the NBA, especially because
yeah,
refs aren't going to give you like any extra respect because of who you are, sort of thing. But
and
because
he didn't have a size or physicality advantage in the
no,
NBA like he did in college. So
but man, could he ever like put his head into people and draw fouls? Like, what a interesting player. What like one of the best like one of the most interesting college players ever, but was not someone who was ever going to play in the NBA. And that's probably how some people think about how do you pronounce his name? I always like Jamie Jasquez, like
Jaime
Jaime Jasquez,
Jaquez, yeah,
Jaquez, Jaime Jaquez. That's a cool name.
just pretend that the J's are H's.
Yeah, I can handle that. um, I see him I see him in a lot of people's first rounds because I think everyone sort of agrees that like this is the kind of player that is going to figure it out in a way that's a little bit unexpected. I haven't been able to quite drop him out of. He for me, he's I think he'll be at least a high second round pick because someone's going to want to just
Oh,
like have him on the roster.
I can't believe I forgot about Julian Phillips, but yeah, maybe that's a better
Yeah,
answer to your
that's your
question.
boy.
I think Julian Phillips is a top 25 player in this draft.
Yeah,
I don't know
and
anyone else who feels the same way. I just think there's a lot of just wings in this draft, especially late first round, early second round, who are just kind of whatever. Like maybe they're NBA rotation players, maybe not quite that level. I just think Julian Phillips, the combination of size, athleticism, defensive instincts, is just a little bit better than the morass of wings.
yeah, the Julian Phillips, like, because I definitely do over index on like steals and blocks, and that's not Julian Phillips's strong point, which gives me pause on his defensive stealing. It's not a hard rule. It's more something that is a small red flag for me.
Mm-hmm.
Though the other thing I always over index on is free throw percentage, and that's a big strength for him. So he had good measurements. I mean, you get to own Julian Phillips because he isn't climbing up very many mock boards. He's still sort of like floating there. So if Julian Phillips pops, like that belongs to you.
Yeah,
But
he's one of the few guys I really like that hasn't really budged much at all this entire season. I feel like he's been a mid-second round projected guy the whole time.
Yeah, definitely. My sort of surprise guy that I'm a little bit higher on than everyone else is Trace Jackson Davis.
Yeah, okay, I can dig that. That's another older prospect.
Yeah, not and like doesn't. I think like at first pass, you're like, this is kind of a college like undersized center who plays with his back to the basket. But when I like watch more of the footage, I just see like a lot of like potential to carve out an interesting game in the NBA. Like he's a stocks monster. I think he's like I think he's going to be big and strong, and his like his measurements are really strong. I think he's got pretty good mobility defending the perimeter. I don't think that he's like, I'm not convinced he's like, I mean, he's obviously not going to be like a starting center, but like, I think he could have that sort of like borderline, like you play him in some front courts, or he's like, gives you a lot of versatility off the bench kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, like like just a guy that you can put on to give you some extra rim protection, who's also going to like boost your like score against matchups, and like he's going to bring you this like valuable skill, and he has more lineup versatility that I think people are noticing. I think the shot's a question mark because he's been a pretty like reluctant jump shooter. Like it looks okay, but he doesn't seem like he wants to shoot it. He shoots around 70%.
He's from the school of slow mechanical looking jump shots.
Yeah. So that's a question mark, and that will obviously limit his potential. But just like a guy who's sneakily, like he's bigger and stronger than I think people realize, and I think he's going to be able to use that in a more versatile way in the NBA and make an impact on defense and on offense. Obviously, with every player in this draft, shooting's a bit of like a swing piece for him, where you don't know, like maybe you'll be a shooter 4 years into your NBA career, and maybe maybe that will be a weakness for you your entire career. But yeah, I'm into him. I have him. Where do I have him on my draft? Like just, I have him at 23. I got Julian Phillips right there as well. So
I like it. Did I talk you into him?
You did talk me into him. Yeah, I wanted to pick one of these. Like I like to pick at least a couple of these like lanky, rangy athletes. Like some of them are gonna pop. Like we talked about it last time. Like I got a long list of them, and watching footage, I couldn't really make a decision. I kind of like Andre Jackson Jr. in this. I know that he's not like a veteran, so he doesn't fit into that archetype of what we're talking about. But like just kind of a guy that does a million things. But if he can't shoot, maybe it's nothing. Maybe he's the next like. It's funny because I feel like he's got the exact same game as what's his name, Justin Jackson did a few years ago. But Justin Jackson's a top 5 pick, and that didn't pan out. But Andre Jackson's stronger than him, but even less of a shooter right now.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your guy Kobe Buffkin, because I mean that was a player that you had in the first round at least. I don't know at what spot when we did our mocks, and I didn't have him in the first round at the time, and no one else really did either. He's really risen a lot lately, but maybe the measurements coming out has helped him because apparently he's 6'5.5".
Yeah.
And
but he's not super long, so I don't think that's really changed. Well, he has a shorter wingspan than I thought he would have. He looked long.
He's kind of taken the crown of like, I I guess what's considered to be the best prospect in terms of just that, like, combo guard who can kind of run offense a little bit as a second option and is just like a relocating shooter
Yeah.
away from
And
Keontae George, who was kind of the early season
yeah,
guy
but I
in
mean,
that mold.
the reason that I bumped him above those guys earlier on was that, like, he's doing a whole bunch of this stuff. Some of it not as flashy as those other guys, but he also can finish at the rim. Like, he's also just like a really strong rim finisher. Like, and when I watch a prospect and I watch their drives and I see them like generating separation at the college level and getting nice easy finishes at the rim, that's like, oh, that tells me you're an NBA player. That tells me you're going to be able to play this role in an NBA offense. It's going to be harder in the NBA, but the fact that you're getting easy looks, like, rather, like when I see a guy just like who's getting into the lane, but like finishing everything so tough, I'm like, that's the like little inch of separation you're going to lose in the NBA, and your whole game's going to fall apart. But Kobe Buffkin just has all this. Sometimes it's kind of invisible because sometimes we actually notice the hard shots more than we notice the easy ones. Like, but you just, when you generate like open layups in traffic, or just like, layups with separation where it's an easy finish for you, that's the big skill that I see. Like, okay, he's an NBA player. He's going to be able to play NBA offense. And now all this versatility that he has as a combo guard, as a bit of a playmaker, as a bit of a movement shooter, as a strong defender, all those things are going to support that. And we're just looking at a really, really strong NBA combo guard.
Yeah, and especially in a draft class that has such a dearth of guards who can both pressure the rim as well as be a threat from beyond the arc. There's really not a lot of those guys at all. I mean, depending on what Scoot's jump shot looks like, Kobe Buffkin might be like your first real option in this draft class.
Yeah, and Jalen Hood Schifino, despite having the monster measurements, he's got a 6'10" wingspan and he's 6'5" without shoes. He's not like, he's really struggled to score in situations that aren't him taking pull-ups. So that's like, how much is that just kind of like downgrades in my mind, where it's like, it feels more likely you're a backup guard, or you just don't have a ton of offensive pop, even though I really like Jalen Hood Schifino early on, but then kind of like watching like, oh, you really don't get to the rim at all.
Yeah.
And you struggle.
I don't know. I really liked Michael Carter Williams in college too, but
yeah. But Michael Carter Williams did not have that pull-up game. Like, Jalen Hood Schifino sometimes looks like Chris Paul snaking the pick and roll into a pull-up. Like, he does have a scoring tool, but he doesn't have scoring versatility. So it's like,
oh, Michael Carter Williams pulled up in the lane for those like short mid-range jump shots. They just didn't go in.
Yeah. Well, that's an important part of it.
Yeah.
Who would have thought? Who would have thought who would have thought missing shots all the time wouldn't be a good projectable NBA skill? That's like, that's how I felt about what's his name? Still in the NBA, a Dookie, has been traded a million times. Oh, he's on your Blazers now. Who am I talking about?
Oh, is this like a quiz?
Yeah, well, I know I can't remember his name, so but I could pretend it's a quiz. And recently traded to the Portland Trail Blazers, played at Duke with R.J. Barrett and Zion Williamson, was a very heralded prospect, getting Paul George comps, but could not hit any shots to save his life in college, and that has continued in the NBA.
Cam Reddish. Yeah,
Cam Reddish. In my head, I kept saying Cam Whitmore. I'm like, no, that's in this draft. Yeah, Cam Reddish. So like, sometimes when just guys are shooting 35% in college, I'm just like, what are we really looking at here? Unless you think like there's something about his game that is going to change.
Yeah.
I don't mind guys being a bit inefficient in college if like the skills project, but when it's just like they're really struggling to score in kind of every play type, it's just like, but so what are we thinking is gonna, like, NBA spacing is gonna change everything from them? Because that's what people hope with Keontae George and with Nick Smith Jr.
Sometimes it does, but everything. It doesn't generally make you a better 3-point shooter, and it doesn't make you, I don't know. I mean, I feel like NBA spacing does more for players who are a bit more of a playmaking threat as well.
Yeah, for
like
drivers,
if you can't find open shooters, like the defense isn't going to care. So
yeah, I agree.
So let's talk a little bit about, we talked about some guys that maybe we've changed our opinion on or are high on, but what do you think in terms of like the trade market? Because there is a lot of speculation about draft night trades that could happen, or kind of shakeups that could happen, especially in the lottery. mostly hinging around my Trailblazers, of course. But
I don't think the Trailblazers are going to do anything. I'm the worst at asking about trade stuff because I'm always like, they're going to stand pat. They're like all these trades are, and then the trades always like, I mean, trades always surprise fans in their construction, right? Like the things
yeah,
that we imagine, the things that we do in the trade machine are rarely how the trades end up looking, kind of thing, because we're very blind to how teams are really valuing different assets. So it's always like when you see I'm always surprised by that. So I was like, I just don't, unless, and we also just don't know who are like the secret trade partners that are emerging. Like I can, if Toronto really does want to trade up, get to that third pick, I still, they've got OG Anunoby and they've got Pascal Siakam. And if Portland is, I think there's a combination of assets that can work there between those two teams. I really don't know what they'll be or how those two teams will value those things, but they're the team that has the pieces that seem the most obvious to put around Dame Lillard in a big way. I just don't know how much you need to sort of like expand that trade to make contracts work, and if Toronto really wants to do that, and what is the right combination of things, because once you're like getting to two of those guys and then contracts need to match, and then I think it gets a little bit messy. And I really think that Portland they've got to fill a hole in the wing, and they've got to fill a hole at the big position, and that's tough. That's like,
mm-hmm.
if
we
if
need
Nurkic was going to be a part of
good
this,
high
then that's
level
fine.
rotation players at two positions.
Yeah.
So
it's hard to accomplish that in one trade.
Yeah.
For the third pick for a theoretical player.
Yeah. So to me, maybe I'm reading way too much into this, but I do feel like the Blazers' trade value of the third pick is higher if Brandon Miller is taken at 2. But at the same time, I feel like the fact that the Charlotte Hornets sale officially went through prior to the draft happening probably means that the Hornets are going to do something. The new owners want to be involved in this draft, and maybe that is Brandon Miller, but I just have a hunch, a feeling, call it what you will, that Scoot Henderson is going to be the pick at 2. So, I think Scoot and Victor Wembanyama, despite all the season-long drama and hand-wringing, are going to end up being the first 2 picks in all likelihood at those top 2 selections. And, that kind of means that we're left with probably not a pick that's going to be quite as highly valued as it would have been if, some teams' GMs are really high on Scoot Henderson, right?
I think that every team has their board, and we don't know what any of those teams' boards are. And some of those teams are after Brandon Miller. Some of those teams, he's like, we don't need to say the V word on this podcast. Like, we don't need to mention Victor Wembanyama because
he's going
for all points of discussion, there's just nothing to say about him. Like, yes, the draft starts at 2. I'm definitely way higher on Scoot. I'm lower on Brandon Miller than just about everyone. I don't see him having anywhere near the same ceiling as the next like 4 or 5 guys, even though like I compromise a little bit and have him. Where do I have Brandon Miller now? I've got him at 5. But it does seem to be the consensus that he's going to be.
Well, your point on the age of the Thompson twins, Brandon Miller's older than the Thompson twins, so
yeah, but I just freshman. We're talking about a pretty normal athlete and physical player whose best attribute is his height. And I was waiting for that wingspan to change my feelings about his prospect, but since he didn't measure, I still don't know what he is. So if he's hiding a 7'3" wingspan or something, like, I don't know about it and can't build into my analysis of him. So I think his skill level is amazing, but like, I just see this guy being a little physically overwhelmed in the NBA, or just not being able to like, and I can't go down the list of all like the best scorers in the NBA and like what wing is a worse athlete than Brandon Miller. Or just like, not just athlete, but like physical player overall. That's my concern with him. I'm ready to eat crow. I think he's really good, and I really actually like some of the subtle parts of his game, is his passing, his like. I think he's smart. I think he's going to be able to figure it out. But I think it's going to be a little bit bumpier, and he's one of those wings that seems like a big monster wing at the time of the draft, and then by the time we're into his career, we're not going to be thinking of him. And that's like, I think he's just going to look a little bit smaller and less like physically imposing on an NBA court. And but anyways, I think obviously not everyone feels the same way about me. So there's teams that would be very hungry to trade up and select Brandon Miller if he's at the top of their board. It's going to change team to team, so it really depends on who Portland would be trading for. But I bet you like 3 teams that could offer interesting trade packages, like, you know, the third pick would still be a juicy prize. And teams get a little irrational at the time of the draft, right?
Oh yeah.
Like they get hungry for this player they've decided is their guy, and they go really hard for that player, and and then that player kind of doesn't work out. But when it does, like, you know, like when the Spurs traded George Hill for Kawhi Leonard, that's always a draft day trade that sticks out in my mind, because it was trading away a really good player for the uncertainty of a draft pick. And obviously it really worked out for them. But if Kawhi had just been kind of, I don't know, what if he'd never learned to shoot? What if he was like Nasir Little? What if he was, or just like, what if he was
Nasir Little can shoot. It's like the one thing he can do. Okay.
I love Nasir Little. I'm just saying, like, what if he ended up being that level of prospect? Just kind of like, oh yeah, we got this big athlete who's useful and functional in lineups, but he's not like, we just traded away like a starter for him and got back our starter in the long term. But yeah, I mean, do you have a trade that you want to see happen as a Blazers fan?
I do.
Lay it on us.
I want to trade down. That's the one scenario that is a possibility in this draft, right? That I haven't really seen anyone bring up. So like we kind of have, assuming Dame isn't going to be traded, right? You kind of have the camp of people who want to take like a Brandon Miller and plug him in and hope that he's good and fills a role in the team right away. You have people that want to trade him to fill a hole on the roster. You know, whether that's the small forward, whether that's the center, whether that's the starting 2 guard. I mean, honestly, we could use that as well, because Anthony and Dame together aren't really a great backcourt defensively. You kind of want to stagger those guys somewhat. You at least need a 3rd guard in that rotation who's defensively solid. But I think another option is like this class, if you're not crazy high on Brandon Miller's upside, and if he is like the guaranteed number 3 pick, he, you know, consensus. So whichever team is trading for Brandon Miller is or whichever team is trading for the 3rd pick is taking Brandon Miller. If that's the scenario we're talking about, and you're not crazy about his upside, like I think there's definitely the option of trading down and trying to get a rotation piece and a pick that's still good, you know, and still get maybe one of these top 8 guys, maybe one of these top 11 guys that both me and you see as, you know, kind of being in the same area as each other in terms of upside. I don't know. I kind of like that as like a middle ground. Usually the middle ground isn't where you want to be in the NBA. But like, I still, there's a part of me that still really wants to just get into the playoffs with Dame by fixing a couple of the holes in this roster, and, you know, kind of have that puncher's chance scenario.
One of the reasons I love the idea of trading down in this draft, and I mean, you basically already said it, but I just want to highlight it, is that like, I'm not so sure that I just feel like there's a very good chance that the 9th pick in this draft is like, could be the 2nd best player in this draft. Like, I just think that I really don't know how to order these players. So, you know, really from 2 to 8 at the very least. And so if you're a team that feels that way and you can extract extra value and still get a guy that you're really excited about, like, maybe you're really into like Osar Thompson, and he, like, maybe you actually think he's the better Thompson twin, because some people do. Like that's a take I've seen out there.
I do. I do think that.
He's got a little bit more game, a little bit less athleticism. Maybe you think he's like Andre Iguodala, and you're drafting Andre Iguodala with like the 8th pick in the draft, and the guy who went 3 ended up kind of like busting surprisingly, because I don't know, maybe it's Amen and he couldn't shoot, or maybe it's like, you know, Cam and his basketball IQ is sort of like a disaster, or maybe it's like Anthony Black and, like, you know, he never figures out how to, you know, becomes the next kind of Ricky Rubio without quite the same level of transcendental passing. And then you're sitting pretty, and I don't know, like, would you trade 3 for 6 to Orlando for 6 and 11?
Yeah, I mean, that's the scenario I kind of had in mind. Otherwise, it's trading 3 for like good rotation player, plus a lottery pick,
Yeah.
and that would be
Yeah.
like the trade with Toronto or something.
If you could have two players in this draft, imagining let's give Portland 6 and 11. Who are you hoping that they draft? What's your ideal scenario for that in this trade
Oh,
down?
Cam Whitmore for sure if he's still available. I love Cam Whitmore. I think his upside is very high. So that would be the dream scenario. I don't know if he's still going to be there at 6 though. That might be kind of a stretch.
Yeah, I feel 6 is really his, like, that's as low as he would go, and
Yeah.
it's a bit of a stretch. Like, I could see Cam Whitmore. I can see going, like, I think his most likely is like 3, 4, or 5.
Yeah, I don't know. I would say probably Anthony Black and Lively.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting.
Oh, I guess the Mavericks are taking Lively at 10. I don't know.
No, who
There's
knows?
not really another big man that you're crazy excited about.
I mean, well, there's a pseudo big man. There's a 4 man who's, I think, a pretty good. And there's 2 other really large bodies in this draft who are not quite big, and that's Taylor Hendricks and Juris Walker.
Mm-hmm.
I
don't know. There's a lot of good options, and I don't think this trading down for 6 and 11 is a particularly likely scenario. I think the more likely scenario, if we do some kind of trade down, is like trading with Toronto for number 13, and I don't know what rotation player on the Raptors has good value that you think would be involved in that.
I mean, it's going to be OG Anunoby or Pascal
Anunoby.
Siakam.
Anunoby in 13 for number 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think people would be mad about that trade in different kinds of ways. Like, I think because people imagine the 3rd pick as having this exponential impossible value sort of thing, but there's a real scenario that the player that gets drafted at 3 ends up not being as good as OG Anunoby. It's like,
yeah, the one thing is, like, financially it's very difficult for us to make a trade unless we're trading Nurkic, like, for one of those kind of mid-level salaries.
Oh, I think you're trading Nurkic. Like, I mean, I think he's...
Yeah,
like,
but then we don't have any
valued.
big men.
Yeah,
like, you got to have someone. You can't have 0 centers. The Raptors tried that last year.
This is true, but I don't think he has. That's his only value to Portland right now. Like, I don't think there's any. I think he's planned to be part of whatever deal they make. If it's like he's the contract that is going to be outgoing if they're going to bring another player in.
It's just hard, man. Like, there aren't a lot of centers in this draft class that you feel great about. Like, even Lively, like, he's going to be great a few years from now. I don't think he's going to be awesome, 20th best starting center in the NBA as a rookie necessarily.
Yeah. I mean, we always project these players like they're going to be their full version of themselves within the first 1 or 2 years, but that's rarely the case.
I just think the wings are more prepared. So I don't know, maybe we draft a wing and trade for a center.
Yeah. I mean, who are the next, like, after Victor and Lively, the next biggest guys are like Leonard Miller, Noah Clowney, and at that point you're already sort of maybe out of the first round. James Nagy, it's like these guys aren't going high. So Tristan Vucevic got some hype at the combine. I already mentioned Trace Jackson Davis. Like, yeah, there's a very few guys like taller than 6'9" in this draft that are like being talked about as even high 2nd round picks. So, yeah, you're unlikely, unless you're the San Antonio Spurs, you are very unlikely to find your center of the future in this draft.
Yeah.
But, that's what they maybe said about Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And also, center is the position where I feel like if you're awesome or very good at the other 4 positions, you can just have, like, a good defensive center that can, like, make a pass and be okay.
Just got to be better than Drew Eubanks.
Well, that isn't hard to do.
This is true. This is my point. They can do it. Will Bradley Beal get moved on draft day?
Not on draft day, but I do think he will get moved.
They want to, but who wants him is the question. Definitely, I think teams there'll be quite a, like, they'll be able to stir up a market for him because there's
Yeah,
enough
I mean the hard thing is
anxious
just
teams out there.
the teams that it makes the most sense for, like the 76ers or the Bucks or teams like this, are also the teams that can't really trade for him because they don't have
Yeah.
the assets and contracts to put together a package that's appealing at all.
But I do think Washington is going to get their pick of those packages. Yeah, they're gonna get.
Yeah.
I think people being like, oh, they're not going to get this monster package of draft picks, and that might be true, but I mean, I'm most curious. Like, do you think the Sixers would consider putting Maxey in a deal?
I mean, I think they would have to. It makes no sense to have Harden, Maxey, and Beal, especially if you're moving off Tobias Harris, who's like your only above average wing.
So, I mean, the thing is, like,
That's not an NBA team. What is that?
Yeah, yeah. But he's only slightly worse right now than Bradley Beal is. Like,
Yeah,
statistically speaking, at least. Like, I think Bradley Beal does a few things at a much higher level than Maxey, and then guaranteed by the end of Bradley Beal's monster contract, Tyrese Maxey is going to be better than him. But I don't have the same in my mind. I don't see the same ceiling for Tyrese Maxey, like unless he completely changes who he is as a defender or playmaker. I just see kind of like, oh, this is a cool play finisher that can exploit slow defenders and shoot some threes. So unless he changes other parts of his game, I'm just like, I don't know. James Harden, Bradley Beal, and Joel Embiid is like, I think they'll consider it. So that's a potential package from Philly. So I think some Philly fans would hate that. Like there's Maxey truthers out there.
Yeah. I think he makes a lot of sense on the Heat if the Heat can put together something for him.
Yeah, I mean it'll be draft picks and Tyler Hero. And yeah. I don't get the Tyler Hero. I'd rather have Maxey than Hero.
The one team and I financially I don't know how this would work, but I would like to see Bradley Beal on the Grizzlies.
Yeah. I mean,
I think that makes sense. Like their biggest weakness is like perimeter creation and scoring.
They got Desmond Bane.
Yeah, you can always use more of that though. Like,
yeah,
I just think, like, especially in the Lakers series,
they could really use Bradley Beal at least for the first 25 games of this season.
Oh no, yeah, no, that's definitely true. I mean, they were just so reliant on Luke Kennard being on the floor to have a competent offense in the Lakers series.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, that reveals a real need.
Yeah, I'm not actually that low on the. I don't really get I don't want to go into the jaw stuff, but I'm still optimistic on Memphis's future. Like they've got they could go get Bradley Beal. They've got the assets to do it. They've got the draft picks. They got the contracts could be a little bit difficult because they're not really paying anyone besides quadruple J and Justin Jackson Jr. But yeah, I don't know. Like that'd be an interesting one. Phoenix has nothing left to trade. The Clippers can't really get in there unless it's.
If the Wizards want draft picks, the one team that they could probably get that from is like the Pelicans, just like McCollum and a few firsts for Bradley Beal. I don't know if that's the direction the Wizards want to go, but if they just want to flip a contract for a bunch of draft assets, none of them are probably going to be high picks. But
and then the Blazers.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't want to trade for Bradley Beal.
Yeah, but your front office would do it. That's exactly what the Blazers love doing. All we need is two playmaking guards and nothing else.
Yeah.
It's the Blazer way. Put a scoring guard next to Dame and shoot your way to 40 wins or less.
Yeah, I mean, if we're trading for anyone on that Wizards roster, I'm more interested in Porzingis than Beal, to be honest.
Yeah, Porzingis is a really interesting, because he's opting into his deal, so he's on an expiring contract now, and I think actually people are going to be more excited about him as a piece to try on your roster, and that their success their extent rather than a long-term Porzingis experience, because I think he still has to prove the health a little bit further, and the Dallas thing is still fresh in people's minds. So I think they'd actually love the 1-year rental, and I think with a player like Porzingis, you'd feel like if things went well for both parties, you'd feel strong about the chances to re-sign him. And if they did, so I can see it'll be interesting to, like, Washington is finally has a different general manager, and hopefully they'll have a different strategy. So, and they're gonna definitely be trying to move things. Any other draft deal trades that you're interested in, or
I mean, there's been some news that like the Bulls are finally going to do something. I don't know if it's going to happen on draft night, but you know,
man, some of these
Levine.
teams. Yeah,
Do you want Levine? Who wants Zach Levine?
the Bulls put all like the Bulls like fully collected all the players that I have no like interest in on any team that I like.
Yeah.
Big long time DeRozan hater. Not I wouldn't call myself a Levine hater, but just sort of like not a believer in his high end value. And Vucevic, I actually I sort of like him. I think he seems like a nice guy. And I like his game. I just think it's sort of an awkward piece. I just think he's an awkward piece to build a winning team with. So I wouldn't be excited to trade with the Bulls. The Orlando was very excited to trade with the Bulls when they pulled that off. Jeez.
Oh yeah.
That's what that 11th pick is. That's the Bulls pick,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, brutal. Sorry, Chicago fans. Sorry, Chicago fans.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other draft thoughts? I've gone through a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about.
Not a lot. I guess we can do closing thoughts here. My closing thought is I'm really resisting the urge that I get every single postseason, and everyone else gets too, as you see by the constant reshuffling of like draft boards, like really late in the year. These guys that didn't even appear in their top 50 for the entire season are all of a sudden like 24th overall. But I'm really resisting the urge to make like last minute changes. I feel like far more often than not, that's a mistake when you do it. I just think there's a lot of kind of overthinking it that goes into it. It's easy to see a prospect and just like really highlight on one or two strengths that they have rather than like looking, because you're just like watching highlights and clips and stuff rather than like looking how they actually fit into a basketball team on the floor in like a real way. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to fall into that, even though there's just like a lot of these wings are really shuffling up and down draft boards late in the season. It feels like, you got new names shuffling in all the time.
Yeah, I try not to overreact to like people's mock drafts changing or players trending after like workouts or things like that, because like to me that information is never really that valuable. There's always a couple guys who pop in the combine, and that is sometimes you do learn something about a player seeing them in a different setting after knowing them well in college. But some of the workout stuff I don't really care about. The only thing that changes for me, as I've said a few times, is like since I don't really stop watching footage until like a few days before the draft, there's still players that I'm learning about. Like, I don't know anything about Bobby Klintman, and he's a guy that like he's just not someone who I've had a chance to watch a lot of film on. So like I'm gonna like in a couple days I'm gonna watch some Bobby Klintman film, and maybe he's all of a sudden he's in my first round or something like that because I see something I like. So there's still a few guys that I'm like forming opinions on. So there's still a little bit movement, but I try not to pay attention that much to like the news or guys that become trendy. Because I don't think there is usually that much to that unless they're trending for some sort of like reason that I can get behind.
Yeah, I mean, also moving guys up is one thing, but also just dropping guys. We talked a little bit about Rayan Rupert. Like, I don't really understand why he's falling on a lot of people's draft boards, especially when why would you the season for the NBL has concluded, and at the conclusion of that season you have him like just outside the lottery, and then a couple of months later he's fallen like outside the first round. Like I don't fully understand like the logic behind that, but
yeah, me neither. Especially because of like his absurd physical dimensions and the fact that he was able to carve out a role in a competitive league. Like he still has a long way to go, and maybe I get the Frank Ntilikina vibe from some people, but he's like wing size with a really really like monster wingspan. Like he's a lot bigger than a lot of these guys who are in the lottery. Like he's one of the truly like exceptionally sized wing players in this draft. So unless like and like yeah, I think he's got a lot of room to grow. I don't really get it either why he's dropped, especially for this kind of like usual college flotsam It just seems like a high upside pick that, the Thunder are going to draft him.
I like it. We're in on the physical toolsy guys.
Yeah, I mean, just like I don't like the physical toolsy guys when they don't really look like they can play. But I thought Ryan Rupert looked like he really flashed some good competitive instincts, some playmaking, and I think and there's lots of room to grow on lots of the other stuff. Like I don't think anything looks broken there. I don't know what his ceiling is, but there's just like a lot there that you'd be excited to bring into your program, I think. But the mock drafts disagree.
You got any closing thoughts?
No, I guess we should just do some plugs. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel. Simon's always uploading a lot of our material there, especially if you want to get some quicker segments of the podcast and other stuff. The main thing is we're going to be live casting. We're going to be live streaming on the draft. So if you just kind of want to join us to watch the draft, pay attention to that. We'll be live streaming to YouTube, so pay attention to that channel there. Follow us on Twitter, and we also have like a Discord community if you just want to push back on some of our thoughts or anything like that. We're always available to chat there or ask any of your NBA questions.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, and as always, we just need to give you a really generous reminder, a very life-affecting reminder in case you've ever forgotten that ball is life.
We'll talk to you next time.